This is Law of Attraction Explored. I'm Tim Grimes. Some of you are probably wondering about my coaching, so I thought I would just take a minute to explain what it is that I offer. What I do with people is get real deep. And from what I've seen, that's not something that is done that often in the law of attraction space or in the self-development space in general. And what do I mean by we get deep? Well, if you've been listening to this podcast, you know exactly what I mean when I say that. We're going to touch something inside of you that's going to transform your life. And that's what it's all about. The kind of coaching that I offer is meant to transform your life. And I feel very confident that it will transform your life and that you'll enjoy doing it. And if you don't, to be frank, you don't have to pay me. I like working with people who want to go deep. People who are willing to explore what's going on the inside and realize that there's nothing wrong with them. And that what is going on the inside is actually good. And dare we say it, what's going on the inside is actually God. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can always email me at info@radicalcounselor.com, or you can just go to my website, radicalcounselor.com, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. So I thought we would pick up from the previous episode discussing thinking and how reactive we tend to be towards our thoughts a lot of the time. And Emmett Fox gave a wonderful explanation of how to deal with this reactivity and become less reactive when discussing Jesus' famous line, "Resist not evil." And there's a lot to unpack there, obviously. And we can really only begin to unpack it. As I said last episode, I'm just showing you techniques or approaches that point you to where you want to go. But what's more important than the technique or approach is going there. Being there. And going there and being there is usually far more simple than we might expect. Now, I'm not talking about manifesting a specific thing quickly, although often you can manifest things much faster than you expect. And there's so much wonderful advice these days out there, both from the old classic law of attraction teachers and newer teachers who you might find on places like YouTube or on podcasts, who can tell you about specifically manifesting things quickly and really inspire you and help you do that. However, what we're discussing in this podcast generally is not that. It's about manifesting the moment, meaning being in the moment fully, to the extent that we recognize that what we really want, we already have. So it's not about external validation. It's about internal validation. And from having more of this internal validation, external validation usually follows in some degree or the other. But the depth of what you are is what we're discussing here, and what I'm most interested in sharing with you. And that depth, quite simply, can be referred to as God, or the universe, or your imagination, or your divine subconscious, or whatever term you want to use. Really, it's ineffable what you are. But what you are is not what you consciously think. And that's a lot of what Emmett Fox was getting at last episode, and what I also like to discuss and have discussed in detail in books like The Joy of Not Thinking. So the book that we were reading last episode, the excerpt from, the Sermon on the Mount, a few pages later from the excerpt I read, there's another few lines that are worth referring to. Emmett Fox wrote, "Cause and effect are from the within to the without. This all-embracing master law is not difficult to grasp in theory once it has been clearly enunciated. In practice, however, it is extraordinarily difficult to avoid losing sight of it in the rush and tumble of everyday life. We are so constituted that we can give our conscious attention to only one thing at a time, and when we are not deliberately attending to the observance of this law, when the interest in what we are doing or saying monopolizes our attention, our already formed thought habits are sure to determine the tenor of our thinking. We constantly forget the master law in practice until we have drilled ourselves in its observance with the utmost care. Meanwhile, as long as we go on breaking the law, even though it may be in forgetfulness, we shall continue to incur punishment. It is obvious from this that nothing is worthwhile, nothing has any real significance but a change of policy in this secret place. Think rightly, and sooner or later all will be well on the outside. Rest content with change in the outer observance without also changing your thoughts and feelings, and you not only waste your time, but you may easily lull yourself into a false sense of security and live in a fool's paradise. Again, a lot to unpack there. And one reason that Emmett Fox was so fond of the golden key, which is simply to, instead of thinking of your problem, think on God instead, and such an advocate for mental diets, and he wrote so wonderfully about mental diets in his pamphlet, The 7-Day Mental Diet, is exactly for the reason that he just said, which is that it's so easy to lose track of this deeper part of us, what we truly are, which is God, which is the universe, which is our free imagination. It's so easy to lose track of that in our day-to-day lives. There's so much stuff going on. And implementing things like mental diets or implementing ways of looking at our thinking where we can give some distance to our thoughts that are so ever-present and constant is very, very helpful. Again, this is stuff I talk about in The Joy of Not Thinking. And I think too often in the law of attraction, you hear about a certain technique or a certain teacher or a certain person manifesting a specific outward thing, and then that person or teacher loses track of the inner value of what that manifestation was. It's so easy to lose track of our inner well-being when we become overly focused on manifesting outward things. That's not to say you shouldn't try to manifest outward things. It's just the inner health you have is more important than those outward things, at least most of the time. And as within, as without, as we all know. Because what's very interesting is our thinking, or as I like to say, our overthinking, our conscious thinking, is what hinders our ability to recognize what we actually are. God is what's happening when we think something else is happening. Because God is always happening. It's always here, as I said. God is always here, but we superimpose something else on it instead and become unhappy because of that. And the funny thing is that when you recognize that God is here, you don't care about anything changing really. Because salvation is in this moment. And this is just what we should recognize again and again and again. You know, Lester Levinson said, and this is a quote, he said, "When you dwell in yourself, you have no desire to be liberated. It is only when you are in the ego that you desire liberation." And, you know, Lester was using self, that term, in the capital S sense, meaning God. So in other words, when you dwell in God, when you recognize God, you have no desire to be liberated. It's only when you're overthinking that you desire liberation. Because liberation is a made-up concept. It is a thought. You already are liberated. And whenever you recognize this, you are free. Because you already are free. And actually already have been free. Always have been free. This is why Byron Katie always asks, what would you be without that thought? Who would you be without that thought? Who would you be? And if we're honest with ourselves, the answer to that question, I think, usually for most of us, is going to be perfect. Whatever answer verbally we come up with is not important. It's the nonverbal answer. But some of those words that might come up for you would be God, or the universe, or perfect peace, or something like that. This is deep, deep stuff. The recognition that there is truly nothing wrong with you. That probably is the heart of the law of attraction. just like it's probably the heart of most spiritual teachings. And we easily forget that and get distracted.